No, Meghan is not invited to my upcoming Santa Barbara event. I have no involvement with the Epstein matter. Prince Andrew and Meghan do. She made an advance toward me. I did not respond.
Just when it seemed like the tension surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had started to settle, a new development has brought them back into the spotlight, this time from an unexpected direction within Hollywood. Reports began circulating that actor and filmmaker Kevin Costner had made a quiet but noticeable decision that, while not explosive on the surface, quickly caught the attention of both entertainment insiders and royal watchers. According to those familiar with the situation, the moment did not happen on a red carpet or in a public interview, but during a private discussion connected to a well-known charity event in Santa Barbara. The event, often referred to as the 1805 Live Benefit, has built a reputation over the years as more than just a fundraiser. It is considered one of those rare spaces where philanthropy and influence intersect, drawing in a mix of high-level figures from film, media, and business who tend to operate behind the scenes rather than in front of headlines. In that setting, where conversations are usually measured and carefully worded, Kevin Costner reportedly made it clear that Meghan Markle would not be included in future gatherings tied to the event at his private estate. It was not delivered as a public statement or a dramatic announcement, but those present understood the significance immediately. Costner, who has spent decades in the industry, is known for maintaining a relatively low-key public image. He is not someone typically associated with public disputes or attention-seeking commentary, which made the clarity of his reported stance stand out even more. In environments like this, where relationships are often managed quietly and decisions are rarely spelled out so directly, even a subtle boundary can carry weight. The reaction in the room, according to accounts, was noticeable. Conversations reportedly paused, and the tone shifted as people processed what had just been said. In Hollywood circles, where access and inclusion often function as signals of status and alignment, decisions about who is welcomed into certain spaces can have broader implications than they might appear to outsiders. The significance here is not simply about a single guest list. Events like the Santa Barbara Benefit have gradually become part of a larger network of influence, where producers, executives, investors, and creatives come together not only to support charitable causes, but also to strengthen professional connections that shape future projects. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, this kind of environment has been particularly important in recent years. After stepping back from their roles within the British royal family, they relocated to Montecito with the intention of building a new chapter centered around media, production, and public influence within the American entertainment industry. But Costner's reported decision seemed to point towards something larger than a single moment, hinting that the mood within certain Hollywood circles may be shifting in subtle but meaningful ways. Industry observers noted that when figures like Costner make quiet but firm choices about access, it often reflects broader sentiment rather than a personal stance. In an environment where relationships shape opportunity, doors rarely close with announcements. They simply stop opening. For some insiders, the situation suggested that the Sussex brand, once seen as a compelling mix of royal prestige and Hollywood ambition, may now be facing a more measured and cautious reception among influential decision-makers. While Prince Harry continued to appear publicly engaged, smiling on stage and receiving applause, there were indications that the atmosphere behind the scenes was more complex than it appeared on camera. Moments like these are rarely about what is visible. In Hollywood, perception and positioning often shift quietly, and those shifts are usually first noticed by the people closest to the room. As Costner spoke and the event unfolded as planned, some attendees reportedly sensed a subtle change in tone, the kind that does not disrupt the evening, but lingers beneath it. Attention soon returned to the event itself, the Santa Barbara Benefit that had initially sparked these conversations. From the outside, it looked exactly as expected. A polished, high-profile gathering set against the California coastline, with guests arriving in formal attire and moving through an evening designed to blend philanthropy with prestige. The setting carried all the familiar elements of influence, carefully curated and visually seamless. To viewers watching from afar, the night appeared to unfold without incident. Prince Harry took the stage, accepted his recognition, and addressed the audience with composure. Applause followed, cameras captured the moment, and the official narrative reflected success and celebration. Yet, for those who were actually present, the experience was described in more nuanced terms. Several attendees later suggested that the atmosphere felt unusually restrained, not overtly uncomfortable, but lacking the warmth and ease typically associated with gatherings of this kind. In spaces where status and relationships are often communicated through small gestures, even slight changes in tone can carry significance. Observers pointed to body language, timing, and interaction patterns as subtle indicators. While nothing publicly disrupted the event, there was a sense among some that the usual energy was muted. Conversations remained polite, but the natural flow of engagement that often defines these gatherings seemed, at least to a few insiders, more controlled and less spontaneous. Kevin Costner's presence, in particular, was described as measured and reserved throughout the evening. As host, he maintained professionalism, but without the outward warmth that typically signals ease and familiarity in such settings. It was not confrontational, nor was it dismissive, but it was noticeable enough for those attuned to these environments to take note. In a space where nothing is said directly, those small differences often say the most. His interactions with Meghan Markle throughout the evening were described as notably brief and carefully contained. There were polite acknowledgments and the expected social courtesies, but none of the relaxed, extended exchanges typically seen between guests of similar standing. Nothing about the moment was overtly dramatic. There were no visible disagreements or confrontations, and yet it was precisely that absence of friction that made it stand out to those familiar with how these spaces usually operate. In Hollywood's tightly managed social environment, tension rarely presents itself through open conflict. Instead, it tends to surface through what does not happen, through conversations that never quite begin, or interactions that end just as quickly as they start. Several attendees quietly compared impressions as the night went on, with some interpreting the distance as intentional, while others wondered whether something had shifted behind the scenes before the event even began. There was also speculation, though unconfirmed, about conversations that may have taken place prior to the gathering. Some industry sources suggested that representatives or agencies connected to the event may have had input on the guest list, possibly encouraging certain appearances. However, those familiar with Kevin Costner's long-standing reputation found that explanation less convincing. Over decades in the industry, he has been known for maintaining independence and making decisions on his own terms, often resisting external pressure when it comes to personal or professional boundaries. That context made the dynamic observed during the event more difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Even as the evening continued without incident, the sense of separation remained noticeable to those paying attention, leaving an undercurrent of curiosity about what, if anything, had influenced it. As conversations moved beyond the event itself in the days that followed, the narrative began to evolve. What had initially been interpreted as subtle social distance started to take on greater significance as new claims circulated within media and industry circles. Reports emerged suggesting that a comment attributed to Costner had begun making its way through private discussions, reframing the situation in a way that drew far more attention. According to these reports, the alleged remark referenced Meghan Markle in a context that some interpreted as invoking broader reputational concerns tied to past controversies involving the royal family. It is important to note that such claims remain unverified and have not been supported by direct public statements. Still, the mere suggestion of such a comparison was enough to generate strong reactions. Within both Hollywood and royal circles, certain associations carry lasting weight, particularly those connected to highly publicized scandals. The fallout from past controversies involving figures like Jeffrey Epstein had already left a deep and lasting impact on the monarchy, especially in relation to Prince Andrew, whose links to the case led to significant public scrutiny and long-term consequences for his role. Because of that history, even indirect or speculative connections to similar narratives tend to draw immediate attention, regardless of their accuracy. In this case, the situation quickly moved beyond a single event or interaction and became part of a wider conversation about perception, reputation, and how quickly narratives can shift once they begin circulating. While some corners of the internet had previously circulated unverified rumors involving Meghan Markle, those discussions had largely remained on the fringes. What made this moment different, at least in the eyes of observers, was the suggestion that such conversations were now being echoed, even indirectly, within more established industry spaces. For a long time, claims like these had largely existed on the margins, circulating in online forums and speculative discussions without gaining traction among credible sources. Lacking verification or support from established voices, they were generally dismissed as background noise in an already crowded digital landscape where rumor often moves faster than fact. What shifted the situation, however, was the suggestion that someone with significant standing in the entertainment industry had, even indirectly, echoed part of that narrative. Kevin Costner is not a tabloid figure or an anonymous commentator operating behind a screen. He is an Academy Award-winning actor and filmmaker whose reputation has been built over decades on professionalism, consistency, and a degree of independence that has earned him respect across Hollywood. When a figure like that is perceived to be connected to a controversial conversation, the reaction tends to be immediate and far-reaching. As reports of the alleged comment began circulating, discussions quietly intensified within industry circles. Executives, producers, and advisors across Los Angeles reportedly began paying closer attention, not necessarily because of confirmed facts, but because of the potential implications. In Hollywood, perception often carries as much weight as reality, and even indirect associations with sensitive topics can influence decisions about partnerships, casting, and long-term collaborations. Media strategists and corporate communications teams, whose role is to anticipate and manage reputational risk, are particularly attuned to moments like this. Their focus is rarely on whether a claim is true in the moment, but on how quickly a narrative can spread and what impact it might have if left unaddressed. In that sense, the situation was no longer confined to a single remark or event, but had become part of a broader reputational calculation. At the same time, attention began to shift beyond Hollywood. As the story circulated more widely, it reached audiences and institutions across the Atlantic, including those connected to the British royal family. Within those circles, any development that even loosely echoes past controversies is approached with caution. The monarchy has spent years attempting to stabilize its public image following a series of highly publicized challenges, and advisors remain alert to anything that could reopen sensitive narratives. Because of that context, reports linking current figures, even indirectly, to themes associated with past scandals tend to draw scrutiny regardless of their origin. Communications teams and advisors are known to monitor such developments closely, assessing not only the accuracy of the claims, but also their potential impact on public perception. Prince Harry, in particular, found himself once again positioned near the center of a developing narrative, despite the fact that the situation did not originate with him. Having already navigated a period of intense public attention following his departure from royal duties, any new controversy connected to the broader royal story inevitably draws him back into focus. The situation was serious enough that palace officials were reportedly compelled to consider whether the growing narrative, even if based on speculation, could eventually begin to affect the institution itself. In 2026, the timing made the situation particularly sensitive. The royal family was already navigating a period of unusual strain, with King Charles III managing ongoing health concerns that had limited some of his public appearances, while Catherine, Princess of Wales, had stepped back from duties during her own recovery. With fewer senior royals actively representing the crown, the institution appeared more exposed than it had in years, at a time when stability and public confidence were especially important. Against that backdrop, the re-emergence of any narrative connected even loosely to past controversies was seen as a potential risk. The Epstein scandal had left a lasting impact on the monarchy, largely due to Prince Andrew's association with the case, which led to years of intense scrutiny, legal challenges, and significant damage to public trust. The fallout from that period forced Andrew to withdraw from official duties and left palace advisors working carefully to rebuild the institution's credibility over time. Because of that history, even indirect references linking another royal-adjacent figure to similar themes were treated with caution. Within palace offices, communications and legal advisors are understood to monitor how quickly such narratives can develop, particularly in a modern media environment where stories can gain global traction before facts are fully established. The concern is not only about accuracy, but about momentum. As once a story begins circulating widely, it can evolve in ways that are difficult to control. In this context, the possibility of Meghan Markle's name being mentioned in connection with such discussions, regardless of the source or validity, was seen as something that could potentially reopen sensitive ground the monarchy had spent years attempting to move beyond. As a result, internal conversations reportedly became more focused, with advisors assessing a range of possible scenarios, including how the institution might respond if the situation escalated further. Among the issues considered was a question that, until recently, would have seemed largely theoretical: whether there are circumstances under which royal titles connected to the family could be formally reconsidered if reputational concerns were judged to pose a risk to the crown. This is not a straightforward matter. Any action involving titles would require navigating complex constitutional processes and, in many cases, involve both government and parliamentary considerations, extending far beyond the internal workings of Buckingham Palace. The fact that such discussions were even being revisited, however cautiously, suggested the level of seriousness with which advisors were approaching the situation. In institutions like the monarchy, contingency planning is a standard practice, particularly during periods of uncertainty, and even unlikely scenarios are examined to ensure preparedness. The Titles Deprivation Act was originally introduced during World War I, at a time when the British government faced a complicated and politically sensitive situation involving members of the aristocracy who held royal titles while maintaining ties to nations Britain was at war with. Several noble families with German connections were viewed as problematic in the context of a national conflict, and the government needed a legal mechanism to address concerns about loyalty, perception, and public confidence. In response, Parliament passed legislation that allowed the monarch to remove titles from individuals whose actions or allegiances were considered contrary to the interests of the nation. The act established a principle that, while rarely exercised, remains significant within the constitutional framework of the monarchy. Royal titles, despite their long history and symbolic weight, are not entirely beyond review. Under specific circumstances, they can be revoked if they are judged to conflict with the integrity or reputation of the crown. For much of the past century, however, the law has remained largely dormant. It has existed more as a historical safeguard than an active tool, occasionally referenced in academic or legal discussions, but seldom considered in practical terms. In modern times, the monarchy has typically handled controversies through less formal measures, such as stepping back from public duties, relinquishing honorary roles, or quietly reducing visibility within official functions. That approach was clearly demonstrated in the aftermath of the Prince Andrew controversy. Following intense public scrutiny over his association with Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew withdrew from royal duties and lost a number of military titles and patronages. While those actions did not involve the 1917 Act itself, they showed that the institution was willing to take significant steps when reputational concerns reached a certain threshold. Now, according to some reports from individuals familiar with internal discussions, there has been renewed interest in understanding whether existing legal frameworks, including the Titles Deprivation Act, could theoretically apply in modern contexts. In this case, attention has reportedly turned toward Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, not as part of any formal proceeding, but as part of broader contingency considerations. It is important to emphasize that any such process would be neither simple nor immediate. Invoking the act would require a structured and highly scrutinized constitutional pathway. Legal experts would first need to assess whether any situation met the strict criteria outlined in the legislation, and even then, the matter would almost certainly extend beyond palace decision-making. The British government would likely play a central role, as questions involving royal titles intersect with both constitutional law and public policy. If pursued, the issue could move into the parliamentary sphere, where it might be debated within the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Such discussions would bring in a wide range of voices, including politicians, legal scholars, and constitutional experts, all weighing the implications of setting a modern precedent. Behind palace doors, however, attention had begun to drift back toward an old piece of legislation, one that had not been seriously discussed in modern times, but still existed within the framework of royal authority. The quiet reappearance of a law dating back to 1917, one that in theory allows for the removal of royal titles under specific circumstances, signaled that conversations were evolving beyond routine reputation management into something more structural. While no action had been taken, the fact that such a measure was even being mentioned reflected the level of caution surrounding the situation. At the same time, a different kind of shift was beginning to take shape far from London. In California, within the entertainment industry where perception, access, and influence often determine long-term success, the tone surrounding the Duke and Duchess of Sussex appeared to be changing. For several years after relocating to Montecito, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had positioned themselves at the center of a new phase of their public lives, one built around media ventures, philanthropic initiatives, and strategic partnerships with major players in film and streaming. Their transition into that world had initially been met with considerable interest. Studios, agencies, and platforms recognized the unique combination of global recognition and personal storytelling potential the couple brought with them. Projects were announced with significant attention, and their presence within certain circles reflected a level of access that few public figures are able to achieve so quickly after leaving an institution like the monarchy. However, as discussions linked to the recent controversy began circulating, some industry observers noted a subtle but meaningful change in how those relationships were being approached. In Los Angeles, where major decisions are often made behind closed doors rather than in public statements, executives and advisors are known to reassess partnerships when external narratives begin to shift. In the entertainment business, contracts involving high-profile individuals almost always include what are known as morality clauses. These provisions are designed to protect companies from potential reputational damage, allowing them to reconsider or exit agreements if a partner becomes associated with controversy that could affect public perception of the brand. For corporations managing global audiences and significant financial investments, these decisions are rarely personal. They are calculated based on risk, audience response, and long-term positioning. Within that context, any situation that introduces uncertainty around public image tends to trigger internal reviews, even if no immediate action follows. The goal is not necessarily to sever ties, but to evaluate whether existing partnerships continue to align with the company's broader strategy. One of the most visible examples of this dynamic is the Sussexes' partnership with Netflix, a deal that was initially announced with considerable anticipation and framed as a major step into long-form storytelling. The agreement centered on producing documentary-style content and other projects that would combine personal narratives with broader social themes, positioning the couple as both subjects and creators within the evolving media landscape. At the time it was announced, the Netflix deal was widely seen as a defining moment in the couple's transition, symbolizing their shift from working members of the royal family to independent figures operating within the American entertainment industry. It positioned them not only as public personalities, but as content creators with the ability to shape narratives and produce projects for a global audience. However, as conversations surrounding Kevin Costner's reported remarks and the broader speculation continued to circulate, industry analysts began to consider how evolving public perception might influence the long-term viability of such partnerships. Within large media companies, these considerations are rarely driven by a single event. Instead, they are shaped by patterns, audience sentiment, and the potential impact on brand alignment over time. In the digital era, where public opinion can shift quickly and spread across platforms within hours, even unverified narratives can begin to influence how audiences engage with content. For executives responsible for major investments, the question is not only what is true, but how a situation is being perceived and whether that perception could affect viewership, partnerships, or future projects. The situation also places a degree of pressure on representation agencies, which play a central role in managing the careers of high-profile clients. Firms such as WME, which has been linked to Meghan Markle's professional representation, operate within a competitive environment where their credibility depends on maintaining strong relationships with both clients and corporate partners. When a client becomes associated with developing controversy, agencies must carefully evaluate how to navigate the situation while protecting both the individual's interests and their own broader business relationships. What made this moment particularly notable to observers was not simply the presence of criticism, but where it appeared to be coming from. For years, much of the negative coverage surrounding Meghan Markle had been associated with segments of the British tabloid press, a media environment that has often been criticized for its tone and approach to royal reporting. Supporters of the Duchess frequently argued that those narratives were shaped by bias or misunderstanding, and that they did not necessarily reflect wider sentiment. In contrast, the current discussion, at least as it has been described, seemed to be emerging from within parts of the entertainment industry itself. Kevin Costner, as a long-established and respected figure in Hollywood, occupies a very different position from that of a tabloid commentator. His perceived involvement in the conversation, whether direct or indirect, introduced a level of credibility that naturally drew attention among producers, executives, and investors who helped shape the direction of major projects. As that shift in perception began to take hold, some industry observers suggested that it could influence how the Sussex brand is evaluated within certain professional circles. In entertainment, branding is closely tied to opportunity, and the difference between being seen as an asset or a potential risk can affect decisions that are never publicly explained. This, in turn, raises broader questions about the sustainability of the couple's post-royal strategy. Their California-based ventures were built on a combination of global recognition, personal narrative, and access to influential networks. If any one of those elements begins to shift, even slightly, it can introduce uncertainty into an otherwise carefully constructed position. In the early months of 2026, some observers began to notice a subtle but consistent shift in Prince Harry's public appearances. In previous years, many of his engagements had been closely tied to Meghan Markle, with the couple presenting a unified front across their projects and initiatives. More recently, however, Harry had been appearing more frequently on his own, a change that was gradual at first, but eventually became difficult to overlook. One of the clearest examples came during events connected to the Invictus Games, the international sporting competition he founded to support wounded and injured service members. As he traveled to Canada to promote the next stage of the Games, cameras captured him engaging directly with athletes, veterans, and their families, often without Meghan by his side. The tone of these appearances felt familiar to those who had followed his earlier years within the royal family, when his identity was closely tied to military service and charitable work. During these moments, Harry appeared confident and focused, speaking about resilience, recovery, and the importance of honoring those who have served. The connection he has long maintained with the veteran community remained clear, and for many, it echoed the version of him that had once been widely admired in Britain and beyond. A similar impression followed during a humanitarian visit to Angola, where he supported efforts to clear landmines from areas still affected by past conflicts. The symbolism of that visit was difficult to miss, as it closely mirrored the work carried out by his mother, Princess Diana, whose walk through a minefield in protective gear had become one of the most iconic humanitarian images of the modern royal era. Harry's presence there served as a reminder of that legacy and of the role he once held within the broader narrative of the monarchy. At the same time, these appearances also highlighted a more complicated reality. While Harry focused on service-oriented causes and humanitarian efforts, the broader discussion surrounding Meghan Markle continued to dominate headlines in both the United Kingdom and the United States. Each public engagement placed him in a position where those two narratives existed side by side, often without directly intersecting, yet still influencing how he was perceived. On one hand, there is his commitment to his wife and the life they have built together in California, a life defined by independence from the royal institution and involvement in media and philanthropic ventures. On the other hand, there are the ongoing conversations within Britain about the monarchy's reputation and how it responds to evolving public scrutiny. Navigating between those realities is not a simple task, particularly when both are being shaped by external commentary and shifting public sentiment. For Harry, this moment appears to represent a personal and public crossroads. His earlier identity was rooted in duty, service, and a clearly defined role within the royal structure, while his current position reflects a more independent path shaped by global media, partnerships, and a different kind of public influence. As those two worlds continue to evolve, they do not always move in alignment. The broader question, then, is whether the balance that has defined this chapter of his life can continue to hold. The foundation of the Sussexes' post-royal journey has relied on a combination of legacy, visibility, and access to influential networks. But as perceptions shift across both royal and entertainment circles, that balance may be tested in new ways. Moments like the one sparked by Kevin Costner's reported remarks, whether fully understood or not, tend to act as catalysts, drawing attention to underlying dynamics that might otherwise remain unspoken. For some observers, this period may represent the beginning of a more significant transition in how the Sussex story unfolds moving forward. So, what do you think? Are these shifts simply part of a natural evolution in their public roles, or do they point to something more fundamental changing behind the scenes? Share your thoughts below. And if you're following these developments closely, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates.